right, you ready?
Where's the wedding ring?
Alan Joseph. Oh, it's beautiful. Will's looking down on us from above.
I'm not sure.
Did you sell it?
No, of course not.
I'm getting good.
Yeah, my sweet boy.
He's down below. Grandfather believed the devil would return.
The whole family. Perfect family.
What if one night in the woods turns into a nightmare you can't escape? Evil Dead Burn 2026 brings brutal horror, terrifying moments, and shocking twists that will keep you on edge. Welcome to SAO New Hue. Let's break down the movie, its wild facts, and everything that makes this horror ride worth watching. Evil Dead Burn is a 2026 American supernatural horror movie written and directed by Sebastian Vanecek. He also co-wrote the script with Florent Bernard. The movie is produced by Rob Tappert and Evil Dead creator Sam Raimi. It serves as a sequel to Evil Dead Rise from 2023 and is the sixth movie in the Evil Dead film series. The story follows a young woman played by Souheila Yacoub who is trying to find some comfort and support from her in-laws after the tragic death of her husband. She travels to a secluded house where the family comes together hoping to spend some time with them and deal with their loss, but things quickly go completely off the rails. What starts out as a family gathering turns into a full-blown nightmare. The peaceful reunion becomes what can only be described as a family reunion from hell. One by one, family members start becoming terrifying deadites, turning the house into a bloody fight for survival. The movie also features Tandi Wright, Hunter Doohan, Lucian Buchanan, Errol Shand, and Maud Davey in supporting roles. As the horror gets worse, the characters are forced to face terrifying creatures and deadly supernatural forces while trying to stay alive. A sixth Evil Dead movie was officially announced in February 2024. Sebastian Vanecek was brought on board to direct the movie, working from a screenplay he co-wrote with Florent Bernard. Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert came back as producers, while Ghost House Pictures handled the production of the project. In December 2024, Vanecek revealed that the movie would be titled Evil Dead Burn and that it was being planned for a 2026 release. Casting for the movie started in May 2025. Filming then kicked off in July 2025 and wrapped up in October of the same year. The movie was filmed in New Zealand. Evil Dead Burn was released in theaters in the United States on July 10. Warner Brothers Pictures handled the movie's release in the United States and Canada, while Sony Pictures Releasing International distributed it internationally through its Screen Gems banner. The movie received generally positive reviews from critics. It was also a solid performer at the box office, making around $71 million worldwide against a production budget of about $20 million. Overall, Evil Dead Burn continues the brutal and supernatural horror style that fans expect from the Evil Dead franchise, bringing another terrifying story filled with deadites, family drama, shocking moments, and a desperate fight to survive. At the Price family's vacation house, Joseph Price discovers some old research belonging to his late grandfather, Benjamin. While going through the documents, Joseph learns a terrifying secret. Benjamin had discovered that the Circle of the Wise Men used the Necronomicon to unleash flesh-possessing demons known as Deadites. He also discovered the Kandarian dagger, a powerful weapon that could send the Deadites back to hell. But Joseph accidentally removes the spells that were hiding the dagger from the Deadites, unknowingly setting the stage for everything that is about to happen. Sometime later, Joseph's brother Will gets into a heated argument with his wife Alice. Will is drunk and angry, so he gets into his car and drives away. While traveling down a lonely country road, he suddenly sees Jessica, who has already been possessed by a deadite, standing in front of his car. Will crashes while trying to avoid her as he burns to death inside the wreckage. The decapitated Jessica begins reciting a passage from the Necronomicon. The supernatural words cause Will to come back as a deadite. Later, the family gathers at Will's cremation. Alice meets up again with Joseph's girlfriend Thea, his parents Susan and Edgar, and his grandmother Polly, who is suffering from dementia. Alice is still emotionally distant because she is struggling to deal with Will's death. After the cremation, Edgar secretly goes to Will's coffin, but things quickly turn terrifying when Deadite Will suddenly breaks free. He attacks and kills the crematorium worker and burns Edgar's arm. The family eventually returns to the vacation house. Edgar starts acting strange and slowly begins to lose control as the deadite infection takes over his body. During dinner, Edgar blames Alice for Will's death. He then suddenly becomes violent and fatally stabs. The family dog, Max, Joseph, and Thea try to take Edgar to a hospital, hoping they can get him some help. But while they are driving, Edgar completely transforms into a deadite. He causes the car to crash, and Joseph panics and runs away. Thea is left behind, and Edgar kills her. Back at the house, Alice is attacked by Max, who has somehow been resurrected. She manages to survive and eventually finds Joseph again, but then things get even worse. Deadite Thea shows up and attacks the family. They manage to trap her inside the basement, but the danger is far from over. Outside the house, Edgar repeatedly shoots himself in the head, but somehow refuses to die. Alice, Joseph, and Susan are completely confused and terrified as they try to figure out what is happening. Thea eventually tricks Polly into releasing her from the cellar. She attacks Polly and infects her. Joseph then fights back and beats Thea to death. The horrifying situation causes Alice to remember painful memories from her marriage to Will. She remembers the physical abuse she suffered from him. When Alice demands answers from Joseph, he finally tells her about Benjamin's research and explains the truth about the deadites and the dagger. Later, Polly transforms into a deadite. She tells Susan that the family can all be together again, even Will. Susan is desperate to believe her, so she allows Edgar back inside the house. Edgar and Susan kiss, and Susan becomes infected. The possessed couple then demand that Joseph give them the Kandarian dagger. They promise to spare the rest of the family if he gives it to them. Joseph refuses to surrender the weapon. Edgar attacks him and leaves him badly wounded. He then turns against Susan. Alice hides inside the house while memories of Will's abuse continue to come back to her. She is forced to face the painful reality of what she went through. While exploring the upstairs area, Alice is suddenly attacked by Polly. Polly convinces Susan to help her kill Alice, but Alice manages to overpower Polly and ties her to her stair lift. The chair then carries Polly downstairs. Alice and Susan hide together inside a bathroom and barricade the door, but Alice is furious with Susan for helping Polly. She restrains Susan and confronts her about the family's past. Susan blames Alice for destroying their family. Alice fires back, accusing Susan of ignoring Will's abuse just so she could keep pretending that their family was perfect. Susan eventually becomes a deadite and attacks Alice. Alice manages to escape into the attic, but deadite Joseph follows her. While searching the attic, Alice finds the Kandarian dagger. Joseph attacks her, but Alice uses the dagger against him and kills him, finally ending his possession. Alice escapes onto the roof, but Susan and Edgar chase after her. She manages to climb back into the house through the chimney. Alice grabs a rotary saw and fights back. She decapitates Susan with the saw and seriously injures Edgar. She then sets the house on fire and uses the dagger to kill Max, badly wounded and exhausted. Alice collapses outside the burning house. Then she hears Will's voice. Standing in front of the flames is Will's burned and horrifying deadite body. Alice runs away from the house and makes her way to a nearby construction site. But Will catches up with her. He attacks Alice, crippling her leg, and traps her inside a pit that is slowly filling with boiling tar. Alice refuses to give up. She grabs a jackhammer and fights Will after a brutal struggle. She manages to stab him with the Kandarian dagger. For a brief moment, Alice sees Will restored to his normal human form. He tells her that he loves her. Alice looks at him through her tears and realizes that those words can't erase everything he did to her. She sadly replies, "That's not enough." She then crushes Will's deadite head with her bare hands. Badly injured, Alice crawls out onto the road. Soon, police officers and paramedics arrive to help her. When they ask Alice who caused all of her injuries, she simply answers, "My ex-husband." The nightmare doesn't completely end there. During the post-credit scenes, Polly is revealed to have survived. She escapes by cutting off her own leg and then attacks a random motorist who happens to drive by. Meanwhile, at the crematorium, deadite Ellie Bixler is resurrected from her unclaimed ashes. She immediately attacks and kills the manager's daughter. These final scenes show that the evil isn't truly gone, leaving the door wide open for even more terrifying deadite chaos in the future. Casting Souheila Yacoub as Alice Price, Souheila Yacoub anchors Evil Dead Burn as Alice Price, the central figure navigating grief after her husband's death and seeking comfort with her in-laws at their isolated family home. Born on the 29th of June 1992 in Geneva, Switzerland, to a Tunisian father and a Flemish mother, Yacoub brings a distinctive physicality and emotional intensity shaped by an early life far removed from cinema. She devoted her childhood and adolescence to rhythmic gymnastics, joining the Swiss national team and competing in the 2009 and 2010 World Championships. She trained at the Haute École Fédérale de Sport de Marcolin, left conventional schooling at 16 to focus on the sport, and aimed for the Olympics before the Swiss team's path to London 2012 was blocked. That setback prompted a pivot. She won Miss Swiss Romande in 2012, then moved to Paris, training at Cours Florent and later entering the Conservatoire National Supérieur d'Art Dramatique. Her screen breakthrough came with Gaspar Noé's Climax 2018, a role that earned her recognition as a César revelation. and showcased her capacity for raw physical performance under extreme conditions. Subsequent work included the Canal Plus miniseries Savages, 2019, the war drama No Man's Land, Philip Garrel's The Salt of Tears, Cédric Clapiche's Encore, and a supporting turn as Shishakli in Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2, 2024. She has also appeared in Making of Planet B and Les Femmes au Balcon. Multilingual and trained in both athletic discipline and classical acting, Yacoub was chosen for Alice because of her ability to convey both vulnerability and ferocious resilience. Director Sebastian Vanecek highlighted her physical presence and emotional range as ideal for a character who must endure escalating supernatural horror while processing personal loss. Her gymnastics background informs the demanding physical sequences required by the franchise's trademark intensity, while her dramatic training supports the quieter moments of familial tension and grief that precede the Deadite outbreak. Yacoub's Alice is not merely a final girl archetype. The role explores themes of marital vows extending beyond death, forcing the character to confront possession, transformation, and survival within a confined domestic space. Her prior experience in intense body focused cinema prepared her for the practical effects, prolonged takes, and emotional extremes that define the production. Cast interviews noted that the ensemble, including Yacoub, approached the material with commitment despite warnings about the relentless nature of Evil Dead shoots, with Yacoub emphasizing the director's focus on character and tone. Tandi Wright as Susan Price. Tandi Wright portrays Susan Price, Alice's mother-in-law, a woman struggling to process the death of her son and the subsequent chaos that engulfs the family home. Born on the 4th of May 1970 in Zambia to New Zealand parents Vernon Wright, a journalist, and Dinah Priestley, a writer and actress. Wright grew up in Wellington. She attended Wellington High School and Victoria University of Wellington before graduating from Toi Wakaari New Zealand Drama School with a diploma in acting in 1994. Her early career included theatre work and a landmark role as Nurse Caroline Buxton on the long-running soap Shortland Street from 1995 to 2000, a part that established her as a familiar face in New Zealand television. Wright's subsequent credits demonstrate range across drama, comedy, and genre. She played Fen Partington in 7 Periods with Mr. Gormsby, Catherine Duval in Nothing Trivial, and appeared in Power Rangers SPD, Out of the Blue, Black Sheep, Legend of the Seeker, 800 Words, and The Returned. International audiences came to know her as Ruth, the controlling mother of Mia Goth's character in T. West's Pearl 2022. She has also worked as an intimacy coordinator on numerous productions, including major studio projects, and serves as Vice President of Equity New Zealand. Her dual experience as performer and advocate for on-set safety adds depth to her contribution on a physically and emotionally demanding film. As Susan, Wright embodies the matriarch, whose grief and denial become fertile ground for Deadite influence. The role requires navigating domestic tension, maternal protectiveness, and gradual transformation. Wright's established presence in both New Zealand screen culture and international horror, Pearl positions her to ground the familial dynamics that drive the narrative. Her long career in ensemble television prepares her for the interplay of relationships under pressure, while her recent horror work demonstrates comfort with elevated genre demands. Hunter Doohan as Joseph Price. Hunter Doohan plays Joseph Price, a key member of the family circle whose presence intensifies the interpersonal and supernatural conflicts. Born on 18 January 1994 in Fort Smith, Arkansas, to Australian tennis player Peter Doohan and Angie Harper Carmichael, Doohan grew up primarily in the American South. He discovered acting through high school and community theater programs, including the Young Actors Guild. After graduating from Southside High School in 2012, he moved to Los Angeles, interning at a casting office while supporting himself with jobs as a waiter, background extra, and Universal Studios tour guide. He spent years studying and auditioning before landing significant roles. The Wuhan's breakthrough arrived with the younger version of Aaron Paul's character in Apple TV Plus Truth Be Told 2019, followed by a main role as Adam Desiato opposite Bryan Cranston in Showtime's Your Honor 2020-2021. His highest profile part to date is Tyler Galpin in Netflix's Wednesday 2022 present, a role that blends charm, vulnerability, and menace as the character becomes entangled with the Hyde. He has also appeared in Daredevil, Born Again, and produced and starred in The Wilderness. Married to producer Fielder Jewett since 2022, Doohan has spoken openly about living authentically in Hollywood. In Evil Dead Burn, Joseph places Doohan on the side of the threatened family rather than a transformative monster, yet the role still demands emotional range and physical commitment. Doohan has described the shoot as relentless from the start, matching the expectations set by the franchise's reputation, while affirming he would undertake the experience again. His television work in character-driven genre pieces equips him to portray a young man caught between familial loyalty, personal relationships, and escalating horror. The casting capitalizes on his ability to convey both everyday relatability and the capacity for sudden intensity. Lucian Buchanan as Thea. Lucian Buchanan takes the role of Thea, a significant supporting character whose presence expands the interpersonal web surrounding Alice and the Price family. Born on 18th of July 1993 in Auckland, New Zealand, of Tongan and Scottish descent, Buchanan grew up in Herne Bay. Her family could speak Tongan, yet her mother prioritized English for socioeconomic reasons. She began acting as a teenager without formal classes, at first learning on sets, then trained at the Auckland Performing Arts Center with instructors including Miranda Harcourt. She earned a Bachelor of Arts in Drama and Psychology from the University of Auckland in 2017. Early credits include the telemovie Billy, The Blue Rose, and a series regular role as Kennedy in Filthy Rich, 2016-2017. She gained wider recognition as Tripitaka in Netflix's The New Legends of Monkey, 2018-2020. Followed by appearances in Sweet Tooth and Mr. Corman. Her international breakthrough came as Rose Larkin in Netflix's The Night Agent 2023-2025, a political thriller that became one of the platform's most watched English language series and elevated her to one of IMDb's top searched actresses. She has also written and starred in the short Leia Tupanga Mother Tongue, which premiered at Sundance, and appears as Queen Kahahumanu in Apple TV Plus's Chief of War. Passionate about elevating Pacifica stories, she has worked as an associate producer on projects such as The Panthers. Thea allows Buchanan to bring grounded realism and emotional intelligence to a horror context. Her experience portraying competent, resourceful characters under pressure in The Night Agent translates to the survival dynamics of Evil Dead Burn. The casting adds cultural and ethnic diversity to the ensemble while leveraging her proven screen presence in high-stakes narrative television. Errol Shand as Edgar Price. Errol Shand portrays Edgar Price, another member of the Central family, a New Zealand actor who studied at the University of Southern Queensland and began in Australian television before returning home. Shand has built a career across film and television in both countries. Notable roles include Vercingetorix in Roman Empire, Captain John Mears in Chief of War, appearances in Mystery Road, The 12, Our Flag Means Death, Wiener, The Water Horse Safe House, and numerous other credits ranging from crime dramas to historical pieces. He is frequently cast in complex, often antagonistic or driven characters, yet also takes on more varied parts including priests, prosecutors, and romantic leads. As Edgar, Shand contributes to the patriarchal and familial tensions that the deadite threat exploits. His experience with intense character-driven roles and his comfort with physical and dramatic demands make him a natural fit for the ensemble's domestic to horror trajectory. His recent and concurrent work in high-profile series underscores the depth of local Australasian talent drawn into the production. Maud Davey as Polly Price. Maud Davey plays Polly Price, an Australian actress, director, and writer with more than 3 decades of experience. Davey trained at the Victorian College of the Arts and has worked extensively in theatre, including with companies such as Vital Statistics and Melbourne Workers Theatre. She is known for contemporary performance, burlesque, and cabaret, and has directed and written for the stage. Screen credits include The Dry Noise, The Newsreader, 5 Bedrooms, The Leftovers, and numerous other television and film appearances. Her stage work often involves bold physical and personal expression, including solo pieces exploring the performing body. Polly places Davey within the multi-generational Price family, contributing to the domestic texture that the horror disrupts. Her long career in both experimental and mainstream work equips her to handle the tonal shifts from everyday family interaction to supernatural extremity. George Puller as William Will Price. George Puller appears as William Will Price, born around 1995-1996 in Brisbane, Australia, with a twin sister who works as a news reporter. Puller initially pursued football before an injury led him toward drama. He trained at the Western Australian Academy of Performing Arts, graduating in 2017. Early roles included Larry in A Place to Call Home, earning an AACTA nomination for Best New Talent, Private Jarrod Vogel in Fighting Season, and Daniel Fletcher in Playing for Keeps. He took the lead in the feature Moon Rock for Monday, appeared in Coyote Baron's North Shore Home and Away as Tim Russell, and various other film and television projects. He has also worked as a writer and producer. Will represents a younger generation within the family, and Puller's rising profile in Australian screen work, combined with his ability to portray both ordinary and heightened emotional states, supports the ensemble generational dynamics. His recent soap and drama experience provides a foundation for the interpersonal relationships that the plot places under extreme stress. Supporting and cameo performances. The wider cast fills out both the domestic world and the surrounding threats. Greta Van Den Brink appears as Jessica, Keanu Karim as Jared, and Victory Ndukwe as Leo. Additional roles include Lara McGregor as the manager, Shamal Singh as cremator Jake, Tapiwa Soropa as server Mike, Coco White as the manager's daughter, Keegan Carfranch as a firefighter, Justin Ben as a taxi driver, and Zoe Brunton as a woman. Voice performances feature Alan Shabat as Alice's father and Michael Hurst as Benjamin Price. A dog named Dax appears as Max. Alyssa Sutherland reprises her role as Ellie Bixler from Evil Dead Rise, in a cameo that connects the new film to the prior entry, with the character's unclaimed ashes at a crematorium becoming a point of resurrection and further mayhem. These supporting players create the everyday texture of the isolated home and the external world that briefly intersects with the family's crisis. The casting draws heavily on Australasian talent, reflecting the production's shooting locations and the franchise's recent geographic expansions beyond the original cabin settings. Director and creative context shaping the casting. Sebastian Vanecek, born 19 August 1989 in Nogent-sur-Marne, France, directed and co-wrote the film with Florent Bernard. After short films including 299, 792, 458 Milliseconds, Mayday and Crocs, he made his feature debut with Infested, also known as Vermines, 2023, a spider infestation horror set in a Parisian housing project that premiered at Venice, won awards at Fantastic Fest and Sitges, and earned strong critical notice for its practical effects, social undertones, and relentless energy. Sam Raimi and Rob Tappert, producers of the franchise, selected Vanecek on the strength of that debut. The casting process therefore prioritized performers capable of delivering both intimate dramatic work and the extreme physical and emotional demands of Evil Dead style horror. Multiple casting directors, including Chelsea Ellis Block, Kirsty McGregor, Will Pierce, Marisol Roncalli, and Stu Turner, assembled an ensemble mixing established international faces with strong regional talent. Bruce Campbell serves as executive producer, continuing his long association with the series, while Lee Cronin, director of Evil Dead Rise, also executive produces. The production companies include New Line Cinema, Screen Gems, and Ghost House Pictures, with distribution by Warner Brothers Pictures. The film was released in July 2026. Ensemble dynamics and production demands. The cast has spoken of the intense, relentless nature of the shoot. Performers were warned about the physical and psychological toll associated with the franchise's practical effects heavy approach. Yet interviews convey a sense of commitment and even enjoyment in the collaborative process. Yacoub, Doohan, and Buchanan discussed the director's emphasis on character and tone, which allowed for moments of improvisation within the structured chaos. The family-centered premise, Alice seeking solace with in-laws only for successive transformations into deadites, requires the ensemble to sustain believable relationships under escalating pressure. The presence of multiple generations, Susan and Edgar as parents, Joseph, Thea, Polly, and Will as siblings or relatives, Alice as the outsider widow, creates layered dynamics of grief, resentment, loyalty, and eventual horror. The casting deliberately balances rising international stars, Yacoub from European and Hollywood cinema, Doohan from major US streaming series, Buchanan from Netflix success, with experienced Australasian performers, Wright, Shand, Davy, Polar. This mix supports both the intimate domestic drama and the global market expectations of a major studio horror entry. Physical preparedness proved essential. Yacoub's athletic background, the ensemble's willingness to endure practical effects and prolonged sequences, and the stunt coordination all contributed to the film's visceral impact. Connections to franchise continuity. Alyssa Sutherland's return as Ellie provides a direct narrative and thematic link to Evil Dead Rise, reinforcing the idea that deadite threats persist across locations and generations. Voice roles and photographic references further weave personal history into the supernatural events. The decision to center a new family rather than returning protagonist allows the casting to introduce fresh faces while maintaining franchise DNA through producers' tone and selective cameos. The performers' varied backgrounds, gymnastics and classical training, soap and prestige television, independent film and major streaming hits, theater and genre cinema collectively equip the ensemble to handle the script's dual requirements of emotional authenticity and extreme horror. Each principle brings a specific skill set. Yacoub's physical and emotional intensity, Wright's maternal authority and genre experience, Doohan's blend of vulnerability and edge, Buchanan's grounded competence, Shan's capacity for complex masculinity, Davies' stage-honed presence, and Puller's youthful energy. Together they form a cohesive unit capable of portraying ordinary people whose ordinary lives are violently interrupted by the Book of the Dead and its consequences. The supporting players and cameos complete the world, ensuring that the isolated house feels populated by real relationships before the Deadites begin their work. Casting directors assembled a group whose collective experience spans continents and mediums, reflecting both the practical realities of international co-production and the artistic ambition of delivering a new chapter that honors the franchise's legacy of inventive, unrelenting terror. Production, development, and pre-production, the Evil Dead franchise has always operated on a model of controlled reinvention. Sam Raimi built it from a shoestring budget cult classic in 1981, then expanded it through sequels that leaned increasingly into black comedy before handing the keys to a new generation of filmmakers. Fede Alvarez delivered the 2013 reboot, a grimly earnest reinterpretation that proved the mythology could survive without Bruce Campbell's Ash Williams at its center. A decade later, Lee Cronin's Evil Dead Rise 2023 took the franchise into a Los Angeles high-rise apartment and opened to $40.3 million worldwide in its debut weekend, achieving genuine mainstream crossover success at the box office, while critics awarded it a strong 85% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes. That performance made a follow-up not merely desirable but inevitable, and the machine behind Ghost House Pictures wasted little time setting it in motion. In February 2024, industry outlets confirmed that a new Evil Dead film was formally in development, framed initially as a spin-off of Evil Dead Rise rather than a direct continuation. The distinction mattered, at least conceptually. The modern Evil Dead cycle had embraced standalone stories that shared a mythology, the Necronomicon, Ex Mortis, the Deadites, the blood-soaked consequence of reading forbidden incantations aloud without demanding strict continuity of character or setting. Each new filmmaker was being handed the Book of the Dead and told to write their own nightmare. The question, as always, was who would take on that responsibility next? The answer came through an unusual route. Sam Raimi, whose instinct for identifying raw filmmaking talent had already been validated by his choices of Alvarez and Cronin, turned his attention to the French horror scene, specifically to a debut feature that had been generating considerable buzz on the international festival circuit. Sebastien Vanitschek's Infested, originally titled Vermins, had premiered at the 80th Venice International Film Festival in 2023 and gone on to win Best Film and Best Director at Fantastic Fest, the Austin-based genre festival that serves as a reliable barometer of adventurous horror. The film, a claustrophobic, relentlessly escalating siege narrative set in a cramped Paris apartment building under assault from a colony of venomous spiders, displayed exactly the kind of visceral confidence and spatial intelligence that the Evil Dead franchise demands of its directors. Raimi watched it and was convinced. Vanitschek signed on to direct in February 2024, simultaneously inking a deal with the creative artists agency that marked his formal arrival in the Hollywood system. The announcement positioned the project as a spin-off though subsequent marketing would fold it more clearly into the franchise's developing sequential mythology. Vanecek brought along his creative collaborator from Infested, Florent Bernard, and the two co-wrote the screenplay together, an extension of a working partnership that had already proved commercially and critically fruitful. Ghost House Pictures, the production banner that Raimi and longtime producing partner Rob Tapper have operated since the early days of the Evil Dead franchise, would handle production, with Raimi and Tapper serving as producers in the same capacity they had fulfilled on Evil Dead Rise. The executive producer slate assembled for Evil Dead Burn was notable for its symbolic weight within the franchise's own history. Bruce Campbell, the actor whose performance as Ash Williams defined the original trilogy and whose voice-only cameo in Evil Dead Rise was a loving piece of franchise continuity, came aboard as executive producer. Lee Cronin, the director of Evil Dead Rise, joined him in that capacity, a passing of the torch gesture that acknowledged the interconnected nature of the franchise's expanding universe. Rommel Adam and Jose Canas also served as executive producers. Throughout the pre-production period, Vanecek spoke candidly about the philosophy he was bringing to the material. Where Cronin had described his approach to Evil Dead Rise in terms of Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2, reaching for that film's combination of horror and manic comedy, Vanecek positioned himself in a considerably darker corner of the franchise's tonal range. He told the studio explicitly what he intended to make. I told the studio that I wanted to make a nasty film, a film that hurts, from which you come away tested. He elaborated further in interviews, describing a desire to create a visceral sensory experience that punches the audience in the gut. And he framed the film's ambitions in terms that made clear he was not interested in the playful, cartoonish excess that characterized Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness. He wanted the audience to feel something close to genuine suffering, to emerge from the theater tested in a way that more conventionally crafted horror rarely achieves. This philosophical clarity extended to his stated intentions about his own future after the film. I'm going to put all the horror I have inside. It will be cathartic, and if I haven't ruined my career and I can continue to make films behind it, I will move on to something other than horror. It was the kind of self-aware, slightly unhinged declaration that perfectly suited a franchise built on the idea that horror filmmaking is both an art and an act of controlled violence against the audience. The film was officially titled Evil Dead Burn in December 2024 when Vanecek revealed the name on Instagram alongside the screenplay's cover page. The title, Spare, Elemental, visually suggestive of both destruction and transformation, aligned with the franchise's naming conventions, Rise Burn, each word a single, forceful verb carrying apocalyptic implications, while hinting at the specific visual motif that would feature prominently in the film's climax. In May 2025, the project's casting and financial architecture were formally announced. New Line Cinema and Sony Pictures came aboard as co-financiers, a distribution partnership that split the world in carefully negotiated halves. Warner Bros. Pictures would handle the domestic release across the United States and Canada, while Sony Pictures Releasing International would manage international territories, with the specific exception of the United Kingdom, where distribution would be handled by Studio Canal UK, and France, where Metropolitan Film Export would take over. This arrangement reflected both the global commercial ambitions for the franchise and the complex rights landscape that had developed across decades of Evil Dead history. Cast announcements followed quickly. Souheila Yacoub, the Swiss-French actress who had gained major international visibility through her role as Shishakli in Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 2054 and who had previously appeared in Gaspar Noé's Climax 2018, was announced as the film's lead, playing Alice. Her casting was immediately significant for multiple reasons. She was the first explicitly French protagonist in the franchise's history, a choice that gave Vanitschek a way to inject his own cultural perspective into the material, while also creating an inherently interesting character dynamic. A francophone woman operating in an English-speaking family environment, her foreignness becoming another layer of isolation as the horror escalates. Later in May 2025, three more cast additions were announced. Hunter Doohan, who had achieved mainstream visibility playing Tyler Galpin in the Netflix series Wednesday, joined as Joseph Lucian Buchanan, best known for her role in the thriller series The Night Agent, was cast in a supporting role. Tandi Wright, who had appeared in T. West's Pearl 2022, rounded out the principal ensemble. Additional casting included Errol Shand, Maud Davey as Polly, George Puller, and Alyssa Sutherland, whose appearance in Evil Dead Rise as Ellie provided a notable piece of franchise continuity. Filming principal photography on Evil Dead Burn commenced on July 22, 2025 in New Zealand, a filming destination that had by this point become something of a spiritual home for the Evil Dead franchise's modern iteration. Evil Dead Rise had been shot in New Zealand, as had significant portions of the Ash vs. Evil Dead television series, and the country's combination of experienced genre crews, versatile natural landscapes, and production infrastructure made it an obvious choice for a horror film of this scale and ambition. Vanitschek marked the beginning of production with a characteristic directness, posting Day One Evil Aberrant to his Instagram account on July 22. The shoot would continue for nearly 3 months, concluding on October 17, 2025, a wrap that Vanitschek announced via another brief Instagram post reading simply "CSA Avrap Evil Debaram." The production company Ghost House Pictures shared the wrap announcement on their own social media channels. The primary filming location was Auckland, New Zealand's largest city, which served the production in multiple capacities simultaneously. The city's dense surrounding forests and rural landscapes provided the exterior environments for the film's isolated family estate setting, recreating the kind of remote, help is not coming wilderness atmosphere that has been central to the Evil Dead franchise since Raimi's original 1981 film. Auckland has a practical advantage in this regard that is rarely acknowledged. A short drive from its modern skyline places a production in countryside that can convincingly read as almost anywhere, a flexibility that allowed the filmmakers to create a world that feels entirely cut off from civilization without requiring any logistically complex cross-country movement. One of the most notable production decisions was the choice of the central house location. The film's primary setting, the secluded family home of Alice's in-laws, was filmed at a property that horror franchise devotees recognized immediately. The same house that had served as Ruby's residence in Ash vs. Evil Dead, originally associated with the character played by Lucy Lawless. The property, known as Plumley House, is a large timber residence located in Remuera, an Auckland suburb, and it had an unusual screen history even before its Evil Dead appearances. It had been used for the 2009 family science fiction comedy Aliens in the Attic, for Evil Dead Burn, The house received a complete visual overhaul. The staircase was moved from its previous position. Several windows were resized to accommodate the film's cinematographic requirements, and the production relocated the structure visually into a rolling countryside setting rather than its actual suburban lot, giving cinematographer Philip Lozano room to frame it as a genuinely isolated property. The exterior structure remained essentially intact in its essential form, however, making it immediately recognizable to sharp-eyed franchise fans. Interior sets were constructed on Auckland soundstage facilities, where the production team built out the house's internal spaces to accommodate the film's extraordinarily demanding action sequences. Designing sets for Evil Dead means designing spaces where people and deadites can be subjected to sustained, increasingly creative violence while maintaining the illusion of a contained domestic environment. Production designer Nick Connor was responsible for these spaces, which had to function simultaneously as plausible family home interiors and as essentially engineered killing grounds. The attention to detail included the placement of household objects, dishwashers, car seats, cutlery, stair lift mechanisms as potential instruments of horror, a design philosophy entirely consistent with the franchise's tradition of finding menace in the mundane. Philip Lozano, serving as director of photography, had previously shot the horror films Cobweb and Mads, and his work on Evil Dead Burn reflects a stylistic choice that generated some critical discussion. The film's second half was shot with notably low illumination, a deliberate choice that some reviewers interpreted as an artistic decision to make the horror feel oppressive and disorienting, while others found it simply difficult to navigate visually. The film's opening, set at a picturesque lakeside location, is shot with a clarity and even beauty that makes the franchise's signature tonal shift into carnage feel all the more jarring. Vanecek made a significant directorial decision regarding the film's visual approach that distinguished Burn from its immediate predecessor, where Evil Dead Rise had embraced a grungy, neon-lit apartment aesthetic with considerable visual pop. Evil Dead Burn went for a desaturated, grungier look in its more intense sequences. Reviewers who screened the CinemaCon footage described it as having a very different, grungy, desaturated look, a choice that aligned with Vanecek's stated ambition to make something that felt harsher and less aesthetically comfortable than Evil Dead Rise. The production's approach to special effects was consistent with the franchise's deeply rooted preference for practical craft over digital augmentation. Makeup and effects designer Jane O'Kane oversaw the film's prosthetics and physical effects work, maintaining the tradition that Evil Dead films at their best should make the audience physically uncomfortable through the tangible reality of what's happening on screen. This commitment to practical effects was recognized and praised by a significant portion of the film's critics, even those who had mixed feelings about other elements of the production. Owen Gleiberman of Variety specifically noted that the film should win the approval of those who favor practical effects. The NC-17 rating, initially assigned by the MPA, from which minor cuts were made to bring the film down to an R rating for theatrical release, is itself testament to how uncompromising the practical effects work was. Visual effects supervisor Thierry Ollion handled whatever digital augmentation was required to complement the practical work, while sound designer Sami Bardet constructed the film's sonic environment. Several reviews specifically called out the sound design as exceptional. The CGM magazine review praised the way Bardet and the editing team used sound as a storytelling device, noting moments where quick cuts between mundane domestic actions were synced to sound with a precision that significantly heightened tension without any dialogue. Costume designer Sarah Vaughan completed the behind the scenes team. Casting was handled by Kirsty McGregor, Stu Turner, Will Pierce, and for international territories, Marisol Roncalli and Chelsea Ellis Block. The Evil Dead Burn production overlapped temporarily with the early development of Evil Dead Wrath, a separate seventh film in the franchise directed by Francis Gallopi, the filmmaker behind The Last Stop in Yuma County 2023, whom Sam Raimi selected following the announcement in April 2024. The Screen Guild of New Zealand reported in October 2025 that Evil Dead Wrath was following Burn into Auckland production, creating a situation where the city was effectively hosting consecutive installments of the same horror franchise, a remarkable testament to New Zealand's value as a genre filmmaking destination. Post-production principal photography wrapped on October 17, 2025, giving the post-production team a tight but manageable window to prepare the film for its eventually confirmed theatrical release date. The film entered formal post-production status in April 2026 when footage was being edited, music was being composed and recorded, and visual and sound effects were being added and finalized. Editor Maxim Caro, who had collaborated with Warnicek on Infested, handled the assembly and cutting of Evil Dead Burn, a task that was both technically complex and creatively demanding. Evil Dead films live or die by the rhythm of their escalation. The pacing must build relentlessly without ever releasing the tension in a way that allows the audience to fully exhale. Caro's work was specifically singled out for praise in multiple reviews, with the cinema-crazed review offering a particular compliment for the car sequence, calling out Maxim Caro's editing here as deserving double kudos for making the scene land with maximum impact. The CGM magazine review similarly praised how Maxim Caro's editing and Sami Bardet's sound design stood out for the quick visual cuts at times, matched by the pinpoint sounds of certain items in the film, describing editing choices that communicated information and escalated tension through rapid montage sequences that cover events in 10-20 seconds while advancing the narrative without relying on dialogue. The film's runtime, notably longer than any previous standalone Evil Dead feature except the television series Ash vs. Evil Dead, was a deliberate creative choice rather than an artifact of indecisive editing. Evil Dead Burn runs approximately 20 minutes longer than any of its cinematic predecessors, and critics noted that this extended runtime was used incredibly well, creating an unrelenting onslaught once the film's possession sequence begins in earnest. The decision to embrace the longer form represents a commitment to Warnicek's stated intention of making a film that is genuinely exhausting, that truly tests the audience in the way he had promised from the beginning of development. One creative element that generated significant post-production attention was the film's rating challenge. Reports confirmed that Evil Dead Burn was initially awarded an NC-17 rating by the Motion Picture Association, the classification reserved for content that most parents would consider inappropriate for anyone under 17. Minor cuts were made specifically to reduce the MPA rating to R, the classification required for wide theatrical release. The existence of an NC-17 cut of the film immediately became a point of conversation among horror fans, who recognized it as both a badge of the film's extreme content and a commercial necessity that had cost it some of its most uncompromising moments. The post-production period also included work on what the Evil Dead fandom wiki describes as post-credits scenes, elements that several reviewers mentioned without spoiling their content, and which function in the manner that has become standard across franchise genre filmmaking, teasing future narrative directions for the series. An advanced screening of the film was hosted on February 24, 2026, providing early audience exposure to the finished product before the marketing campaign began in earnest. Music score and soundtrack. The musical dimension of Evil Dead Burn represents a deliberate creative continuity with Vanecek's directorial debut. The director returned to Double Danger, the Paris-based composer duo consisting of Douglas Cavana and Xavier Cos, for the film's original score, extending a working relationship that had helped define the sonic texture of Infested. The duo describes themselves as self-taught musicians who emerged in 2023 with the explicit ambition of transcending conventional and academic approaches to music composition, seeking to push the boundaries and provide an artistic experience beyond the usual norms. Their work on Infested had closed the Settimana della Critica section at the Venice Film Festival and won multiple prizes on the international circuit. For Evil Dead Burn, Double Danger developed a compositional philosophy that treated the film's central location, the secluded family house, not as a backdrop but as a living participant in the horror. The composers described their approach in a statement released alongside the soundtrack album. In Evil Dead Burn, the house isn't just a setting, it's an instrument, a character, and a living nightmare. We treated it like a living organism, one that breathes, groans, and slowly consumes everyone trapped inside. Our goal was to create a score that doesn't accompany the horror but infects it. Rather than imitate the legacy of Evil Dead, we wanted to push it somewhere unexpected, brutal, and deeply human. This philosophy is audible in the completed score, which leans heavily into industrial dread and dissonant textures rather than conventional horror movie jump scare stingers. Where earlier Evil Dead films had musical identities that ranged from Joseph Loduca's atmospheric scoring on the original trilogy to the more orchestrally familiar horror conventions of subsequent entries, Double Danger's Evil Dead Burn score operates in a different register entirely, one that reflects both the composer's avant-garde sensibilities and Vanecek's stated desire to make a film that feels genuinely unlike its predecessors in its emotional impact. The Evil Dead Burn original motion picture soundtrack was released digitally by Water Tower Music on July 3, 2026, a week ahead of the film's theatrical debut, allowing audiences to immerse themselves in the score before seeing how it functioned within the film itself. The digital release made the album available on all major streaming platforms simultaneously. The 33-track album is almost entirely score, with the final track, titled Paradise, appearing in two parts. The complete tracklist includes compositions titled Behind Rune and Hex, This Lake Story, We Found You, Evil Dead Burn, and Goodbye to My Son, among others. The titles themselves hint at the film's narrative movements, suggesting a score that tracks closely with the story's emotional architecture rather than existing as purely atmospheric accompaniment. A physical vinyl release of the soundtrack was organized through Waxwork Records, the specialty label that has built a reputation as the preeminent destination for horror film soundtrack vinyl releases in partnership with Water Tower Music. The release was packaged as a deluxe 2XLP edition, pressed on what Waxwork Record described as inferno-colored vinyl, translucent black with heavy fiery orange splatter, a visual presentation that directly referenced the film's titular burning motif. The vinyl edition was housed in a heavyweight gatefold jacket featuring new commissioned artwork by Steve Reeves. The format, designed explicitly for the franchise's most devoted collectors, was available for pre-order at the time of the film's theatrical release, with an expected shipping date in September 2026. The film also incorporated licensed music woven into specific scenes, though the original Double Danger score remained the dominant musical presence throughout. Release theatrical Evil Dead Burn's theatrical journey was marked by a notable acceleration of its release timeline, a signal that Warner Bros. And New Line had confidence in the film's commercial prospects, or at least in the advantage of positioning it ahead of anticipated summer competition. The film's original release date had been set for July 24, 2026. That date was moved forward 2 weeks to July 10, 2026, following the film's explosive debut at CinemaCon 2026 in Las Vegas. Warner Bros. Confirmed the date change to Screen Rant after the CinemaCon screening. The marketing campaign for Evil Dead Burn was structured in phases that built momentum across the spring of 2026. A teaser trailer played before showings of Lee Cronin's The Mummy, which opened in April 2026, a choice that was itself a piece of franchise self-awareness, as Cronin had directed Evil Dead Rise and was now connecting his Mummy film to the next chapter of the Evil Dead universe. This teaser, which leaked online via cell phone recordings from audience members, featured Souheila Yacoub's character crawling through a house in chaos, Deadites attempting to reach her, and the film's new release date reveal. The footage was described as a green band version of the trailer, meaning it was the less extreme cut cleared for general audiences. CinemaCon 2026, held on April 14 at the Warner Bros. Presentation in Las Vegas, was where the considerably more extreme version of the Evil Dead Burn footage was unveiled to theater owners and industry attendees. The CinemaCon trailer, cut specifically for that audience and distinct from the version playing before, The Mummy was an immediate sensation. Descriptions of the footage circulated rapidly through genre media: a woman hearing a strange noise after opening a dishwasher, a bloodied man, and a deadite missing fingers arriving at a door, a deadite's face impaled on a car headrest, the iconic Necronomicon glimpsed, fingers severed in a slammed car door, a body falling onto the sharp contents of a dishwasher, a character drinking from a burning candle, ominous dialogue about family reunion through the cursed book. The footage was praised as maximum brutality and was described as significantly meaner than the Evil Dead Rise material, leaning closer in tone and approach to the 2013 Fede Alvarez reboot. An early screening of the entire film was hosted at a theater near the CinemaCon convention on April 15, 2026, the day after the trailer debuted, giving a select audience their first complete experience of the finished film months before its public release. The first official poster and the full-length trailer were released publicly on May 5, 2026. The trailer was an event in itself, garnering extensive coverage and a visceral fan response. The official plot description released alongside the trailer was elegantly concise. After the loss of her husband, a woman, Alice, seeks solace with her in-laws in their secluded family home. As one by one they are transformed into deadites, turning the gathering into a family reunion from hell, she comes to discover that the vows she took in life live on even in death. The thematic framing, marriage vows that survive death, The horror of intimacy twisted into something monstrous was noted as a richer conceptual hook than much franchise horror typically offers. The film premiered in Paris at the Grand Rex on July 3, 2026, followed by international screenings on July 7, 2026. The American theatrical release date was July 10, 2026, the date that had been confirmed by the CinemaCon teaser months earlier. France and Italy received the film 2 days earlier. On July 8, an unusual theatrical arrangement that was partly a reflection of the film's French co-creative identity and partly a result of the different distribution partnerships in those territories. With Metropolitan Film Export handling the French release, Evil Dead Burn opened in North American theaters on July 10 in competition with several other films, including the live-action adaptation of Moana. The competitive landscape was crowded enough to affect opening weekend performance in ways that would become central to subsequent box office analysis. International distribution was handled by Sony Pictures Releasing International across most territories. The UK distribution by Studio Canal resulted in UK theatrical release on July 9, 2026. The film received alternative international titles in several markets. Italy released it as La Casa del Rogo del Male, The House, The Burning of Evil, while Romania used Cartia Mortiller, Hellfire, Book of the Dead, Hellfire, both titles that emphasized different aspects of the franchise's mythology. Home media, the transition from theatrical to home release for Evil Dead Burn was notably swift, reflecting both the film's modest relative to expectations box office performance and the industry-wide acceleration of PVOD, premium video on demand windows that had become standard practice in the post-pandemic theatrical landscape. Warner Bros. Discovery Home Entertainment announced that Evil Dead Burn would be available for premium digital purchase and rental in the United States and Canada on August 4, 2026, less than 4 weeks after its theatrical opening on July 10. The announcement was confirmed by Dread Central and subsequently covered extensively across genre media outlets. The physical media release was confirmed for September 22, 2026, when Evil Dead Burn would arrive on 4K UHD, Blu-ray and DVD editions simultaneously. A steelbook edition was also available for pre-order, reflecting the franchise's status as a collector-friendly property with a devoted physical media fan base that had sustained interest in earlier entries across multiple format generations. The home video release was accompanied by a curated set of exclusive behind-the-scenes features designed to extend fan engagement with the production. These extras included Evil Dead, blazing the trail in which director Sebastian Vanecek and his crew explored how Evil Dead Burn honors the franchise's ever-evolving legacy while introducing a daring new vision. Additional features covered other aspects of the production, though their full content was not announced until closer to the release date. The absence of an immediate HBO Max streaming release date was noted by industry analysts and fans. Under Warner Bros. Discovery's typical 2026 distribution model, films generally made the transition to HBO Max approximately 80 days after their theatrical premieres, suggesting Evil Dead Burn might debut on the streaming service in late September or early October 2026. No official date was confirmed at the time of the digital release announcement. The home media launch of Evil Dead Burn was accompanied by a significant real-world experiential activation, Halloween Horror Nights 2026 at Universal Studios. Evil Dead Burn received its own dedicated haunted house at the annual event, appearing at Universal Orlando Resort beginning August 28, 2026, and at Universal Studios Hollywood beginning September 3, 2026. The Halloween Horror Nights run extended through November 1 at both parks. The Evil Dead franchise had a precedent at the event. The 2013 Fede Alvarez film had appeared at Halloween Horror Nights that same year, and the Ash vs. Evil Dead television series had received its own house in 2017. The Evil Dead Burn House at Halloween Horror Nights was designed to take guests on a first-hand journey through the Price family's secluded vacation home in the woods. With sequences adapted from the film's most frightening moments, the house was organized to escalate in intensity as guests progressed, with an increasing number of deadites around each corner, and a final sequence promised to see guests succumb to evil forces. Exclusive merchandise was available at both parks, including an Evil Dead Burn t-shirt, hat, and acrylic figure designed to connect with other figures as part of a themed display. The attraction was confirmed as the third major intellectual property house announced for HHN 2026, sharing the bill with Sinners and Hellraiser mazes. By the time the digital release arrived on August 4, Evil Dead Burn had accumulated approximately 29.3 million domestically and $63. 5 million worldwide at the theatrical box office, figures that would be supplemented by PVOD, physical media, and eventual streaming revenues as the film completed its commercial life cycle. By the time media outlet Media Play News covered the August 4 home entertainment releases, the film's global gross had grown to approximately $66.5 million. Reception box office Evil Dead Burn's box office performance was the most discussed and analyzed aspect of its release, not because the film failed commercially in any absolute sense, but because it failed to replicate the overperformance of its predecessor, and the gap between expectation and reality became the central narrative of the film's opening weekend coverage. Projections ahead of opening weekend had targeted an opening in the range of $20 million domestically, a figure that matched the estimate for Evil Dead Rise, which had ultimately opened to $26, $5 million in North America. Evil Dead Burn fell well short of that benchmark, opening to $13.7 million in the United States during its debut weekend. Internationally, the film added approximately $12.3 million during opening weekend from various markets, bringing the worldwide opening weekend total to approximately $25 million. Against a reported production budget of $20 million, this seemed reasonable in raw terms, but the marketing expenditure required for a theatrical release of this scale, which industry analysts typically estimate, brings the true break-even figure to 2.5x the production budget, or approximately 50 to 60 million, meant the theatrical run alone was unlikely to make the film profitable. Evil Dead Burn finished in fourth place at the domestic box office during its opening weekend, behind two holdovers and the newly released live-action Moana adaptation, a competitive placement that reflected the crowded summer theatrical landscape as much as any specific weakness in the Evil Dead Burn campaign. The film's positioning against Moana was particularly challenging from a family entertainment perspective. While the deadite hunting demographic is specific and loyal, it was always likely that a major Disney adaptation would command the lion's share of theater screens and audience attention during a shared release weekend. The second weekend brought a drop of approximately 64%, a steep decline that tightened analysts' long-range projections for the film's total domestic gross. Box Office Watch's prediction model, updated after that second weekend data, produced a range of $31-39 million, as accounting for 90% of outcomes for the final domestic total. The actual domestic performance, confirmed at approximately $29.3 million, landed near the lower end of that range, validating the model's methodology and confirming that the film would not experience the kind of sustained word of mouth legs that might have elevated its final performance. By the time the film's theatrical run was effectively concluded, Evil Dead Burn had earned approximately $29.3 million domestically and 63,566 $5 million worldwide, figures that represent a significant retreat from Evil Dead Rises, approximately $70 million domestic and $149 million worldwide gross. The magnitude of that retreat generated considerable industry analysis about what it meant for the franchise's future. Slash Film's analysis placed the underperformance in useful historical context, arguing that Evil Dead Rise had benefited from a specific set of favorable conditions that Evil Dead Burn could not replicate. The franchise had taken a 10-year break between the 2013 reboot and Evil Dead Rise, a gap that generated genuine pent-up demand from horror fans who had been waiting for the franchise to return. Rise had also benefited from exceptionally warm critical reception, 85% on Rotten Tomatoes, and had surprised audiences who had perhaps expected something more modest, creating the kind of enthusiastic word of mouth that drives theatrical overperformance. Evil Dead Burn, arriving 3 years after Rise rather than 10, had neither the novelty premium nor the same level of critical enthusiasm to work with. Slash Film compared the film's performance trajectory to Violent Night 2022, which opened to $13, $4 million and ultimately grossed approximately $76 million worldwide, suggesting that Evil Dead Burn's ancillary revenue from PVOD, physical media, and streaming could realistically push it towards similar total returns. Enough of the intended audience showed up to more than justify a $20 million budget, the analysis concluded. The Scream Horror magazine framing of the film as a flop was therefore contested by analysts who argued that a film earning more than 3 times its production budget across its total commercial life cycle is not a failure by any rational metric, even if it underperformed relative to its predecessor and original projections. The distinction between disappointing relative to expectations and commercially unsuccessful is a genuinely important one in franchise filmmaking. Studios plan sequels based on projected returns, and a franchise that fails to grow or shrinks requires recalibration. Whether Evil Dead Burn's performance would affect the planned Evil Dead Wrath, directed by Francis Gallopi and scheduled for an April 2028 release, remained to be determined at the time of the film's home media announcement. Critical response. The critical reception to Evil Dead Burn was broadly positive, though measurably less enthusiastic than the response to Evil Dead Rise, a comparison that became the dominant frame through which most reviews situated the film. Evil Dead Burn holds a 71% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes based on 196 reviews, compared to the 85% that Evil Dead Rise had earned. The audience score, described on Rotten Tomatoes platform as the Popcornmeter, which reflects verified audience reactions, came in at approximately 80%, which was actually slightly higher than Evil Dead Rise's 76% audience score. The divergence between the critical and audience scores was interpreted by some commentators as reflecting a fundamental difference in what critics and horror audiences value in an Evil Dead film. Critics tended to emphasize structural sophistication and tonal balance, while core genre fans seemed more interested in the uncompromising commitment to delivering extreme content at the highest possible technical level. The critical consensus captured in Rotten Tomatoes' editorial summary described the film as having the Evil Dead DNA ablaze in this visceral new installment that brings the Deadites front and center for a truly gruesome experience, even if the story has all the subtlety of a chainsaw and a boomstick. Positive reviews were effusive about the film's technical craft and Vanecek's confidence as a director. David Rooney of The Hollywood Reporter, reviewing for Rotten Tomatoes and giving the film a fresh score, noted that Vanecek shows he's not fooling around from the opening sequence, describing the film's very first kill as a maximum brutality demonstration of intent. His full review, however, was more qualified, acknowledging that the film's relentless commitment to gore occasionally left the actors with little scope for character definition, limiting them to playing types, and noting that the film had moments of dark humor but only one gag involving Grandma's motorized stair lift that could be called laugh out loud funny. Rooney also specifically flagged that he had missed the antic spirit, the wicked sense of mischief, and the straight-up goofy comedy that defined Raimi's originals. William Bibiani of The Wrap was among the film's most enthusiastic reviewers, writing in his Rotten Tomatoes summary that Evil Dead Burn was not the smartest Evil Dead. It's not the funniest Evil Dead, it's not the best Evil Dead, but it is the evilest Evil Dead, and that feels right, dead right. This formulation, honest about what the film doesn't do while celebrating what it does accomplish, capture the essential critical position of those reviewers who responded positively to Vanecek's uncompromising approach. Nick Shager of the Daily Beast gave Evil Dead Burn a fresh score while noting that the film finds the funny in the fantastically nasty, and in doing so proves a stomach-churningly amusing nightmare. Owen Gleiberman of Variety was more measured, writing that viewers might long for the lost prankishness, but the Evil Dead spirit is alive, and praising the practical effects work while clearly preferring the franchise's more playful registers. Matt Donato of Daily Dead offered perhaps the most direct articulation of what Vanecek had fundamentally changed, where Sam Raimi brings a more Three Stooges yuck-it-upness. Vanecek wants you to beg for mercy. Matt Oakes of Silver Screen Riot found the screenplay's thematic ambitions praiseworthy, noting that the screenplay once again proves that straightforward horror can nevertheless support rich thematic ideas without drowning in superfluous lore. This was an observation about the franchise's successful formula. More broadly, the Evil Dead series has proved repeatedly that the Necronomicon mythology can anchor new stories without requiring characters to spend significant screen time explaining the cosmology. Chris Evangelista of Film called the film a bloody good time, a positive but deliberately unpretentious assessment that aligned with the broader sense among genre fans that Evil Dead Burn was doing exactly what it promised. The negative critical responses tended to cluster around several specific concerns. The dialogue, which multiple critics described as woeful, was identified as the film's most obvious weakness, particularly by the reviewer who gave the film 2.5 out of 5 stars and wrote the dialogue is woeful, the acting mostly ham-fisted, and the plot feels like a nuisance foisted upon French writer-director Sébastien Vanecek between bouts of dreaming up fresh ways to brutalize the human body. This is a genuinely fair criticism and one that is almost inherent to the Evil Dead model. The franchise has never been about dialogue or character nuance, and a filmmaker who leans even harder than usual into pure sensory impact will inevitably produce a film where the connective tissue between set pieces feels thin. The lighting concerns raised by Jamie Girac of the Mary Sue, who wrote that the film is dark in tone, but it's also dark as in hard to see, and questioned whether the cinematographer and gaffer ever spoke to each other, spoke to a production choice that divided audiences. The deliberately low illumination of the film's second half, which some found oppressively effective and others found simply difficult to parse visually. Cat Hughes of THN, The Hollywood News, acknowledged that the film has a few funny moments but felt the comedy isn't pushed enough to warrant its place amongst the carnage. Also noting that the extended runtime created a sense of repetition in the final act, Evil Dead Burn eventually succumbs to feeling a little repetitive. The final act seems to go on forever, and just when you think it is over, a whole new component reveals itself. The RogerEbert.com review by Brian Tallarico called the film vicious, but argued it was a film so impressed by its most memorable images that it didn't consider how to tie them together. A characteristically precise Ebert-side formulation that identified the core tension in Vanecek's approach between technical virtuosity and narrative coherence. The consensus among critics who reviewed Evil Dead Burn positively and those who gave it mixed assessments was not fundamentally different in its description of what the film is. Rather, it reflected a genuine disagreement about what an Evil Dead film should be in 2026. Those who responded most warmly to Evil Dead Burn were those who prioritized visceral impact, technical precision in practical effects, and a commitment to making the horror genuinely uncomfortable. Those who responded more coolly were those who missed the franchise's comedic tradition, wanted more character depth, or simply found the extended runtime and relentless brutality more exhausting than cathartic. Souheila Yacoub's performances as Alice received consistent recognition across the critical spectrum. Even reviewers who expressed reservations about other elements of the film singled out her work as compelling and grounding. The Hollywood Reporter noted that she was compelling as Alice proves her resilience, while never downplaying the nightmarish mental and physical torture she endures, a performance that the film depends on structurally, since Alice is the audience's anchor throughout increasingly extreme events. The character's French identity in an otherwise English-speaking family environment gave Yacoub material that no previous Evil Dead protagonist had navigated. The isolation of being an outsider, compounded by the horror of watching her adopted family destroyed by demonic possession. The film's place in the franchise's critical history is therefore nuanced. It is not Evil Dead Rise, in the sense that Rise achieved something close to genre consensus and delivered commercial overperformance, but at 71% on Rotten Tomatoes and with audience scores that consistently outpaced critical assessments. Evil Dead Burn occupies a respectable position in a franchise that has produced only one film, the TV series aside, that could genuinely be called a critical disappointment. The film fulfilled Vanecek's stated ambition of making something uncompromising and testing, even if that uncompromising quality proved exactly as divisive as one might have predicted. It should also be noted that Evil Dead Burn carries the distinction of being the first film in the Evil Dead franchise in which the protagonist does not wield a chainsaw at any point, a departure from one of the series' most iconic visual signatures that reads simultaneously as a bold creative choice and a marker of how deliberately Vanecek was working to differentiate his vision from franchise's accumulated iconography. Hodge and at the time of writing, with Evil Dead Wrath in production under Francis Galapi's direction, and an April 2028 theatrical release window on record. The Evil Dead franchise continues its expansion with the same essential formula that has sustained it across 4 decades. Hand the Necronomicon to a new filmmaker, give them enough creative freedom to genuinely scare the audience, and trust that the mythology is strong enough to survive being reinvented. Evil Dead Burn is the latest proof, imperfect, brutally committed, and undeniably alive, that the formula holds.